Today we have a very special guest joining us, Lindsey Schultz. Lindsey is CEO of MRC Recruiting. She's also a mom and a wife. Lindsey didn't choose mining recruiting as a career, it chose her. The daughter of MRC founder Robert Schultz, Lindsey has been involved in the business since she was old enough to pull resumes off the fax machine. She juggled school around trips with her dad, learning every aspect of the business. Lindsey has a bachelor's degree in human resources and organizational behavior from the University of New Mexico and an MBA from Arizona State. She lives with her family in Colorado and is a member of the Denver chapter of Women in Mining. Thanks again for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Well, Lindsey, welcome to On the Rocks. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Emily. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm better now that I'm having a drink. What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a La Crema Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley.
Nice. And so you're a wine fan?
I am. I think I mentioned I was going to drink champagne, but everybody was like, well, you can't burp on a podcast. And I was like, who says that's going to happen? So I was advised against my first choice. I think that people don't drink enough champagne. So that was going to be sort of choice number one, because I would say that this is kind of fun and celebratory. So, but I deferred to sort of my good old standard red wine.
I would say that life is always better with extra bubbles.
Yeah, and not just for brunch.
Yeah, like champagne is actually my husband's favorite drink. And since I'm a bourbon girl, like it happens all the time that we'll order drinks out at restaurants and they come and like put them down in the wrong place. But I love champagne too. I can definitely get on board with that.
That's pretty funny. I feel like my husband, if I order, we'll order drinks and he's on the opposite end. He'll order, they always look like a manly drink and mine always looks like a girl fruity drink. And we were traveling once and did the opposite for some reason. I ordered like a really weird tequila, something or other. And out comes, this stout glass and he's got like one with an umbrella and the lady passed him off and he was like, maybe you should just drink that one. And I was like, oh, come on.
That's why I always think it's funny because when Mark pulls out a bottle, like he'll have guy friends over and they'll be like, yeah, man, you're drinking champagne. They always talk a little bit of smack. And then I'll go and like make a bourbon and I'll turn around and they'll all be drinking it. Right? Secretly. They all want the champagne. Yeah. Well, tonight I'm drinking a bottle of bourbon. Well, not a whole bottle, but I'm drinking bourbon from a bottle of Jefferson's Ocean. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's like aged at sea on a ship. And like it tells you all about the ship's log of the ship it was on and where it went and what the traffic and weather was like through the time it was on there, which I thought was really fun because I live down here in South Florida, ready for summer, even though it's kind of like summer year round here. I'm ready to get back out on the water.
I can imagine that. It's really cool. I like I said, I was thinking of doing a champagne and I have a friend and he's a sommelier and I was like, what should I drink? Give me some advice here. What haven't I had? He's kind of a geek here in the background and he's like, you could drink Burgundy because of this and the clay in the soil. You'll be talking to a geologist. And he was like, champagne, actually, they find seashells often in the vineyards and things like that because it used to be a seabed. And so it's always, something interesting, whatever we're drinking. But I like this captain's log thing.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Yeah, Jefferson's Ocean. And then that reminds me of there's a friend of mine who was doing his PhD in geology at Stanford and started a weekly newsletter, I'm going to get the name wrong, where he covered the geology of the California vineyards and how it influenced the grapes and the wine that came from them. And I always thought that was so interesting because the soil does, right? The soil has such a big influence on what's grown.
Absolutely.
Geology.
I know, it's everywhere. People don't understand how applicable this could be.
That's right. They don't understand how cool we all are working here in the mining industry. A friend of mine, Tara, she runs Banyan Gold. She was just telling me the other week that a group of them invested in a vineyard.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of mining investors got together and put some money into it.
I know, it's really cool. I'll have to figure out how to do that at some point.
Maybe you need to start like cross recruiting from
I have a
like
lot of ideas.
from the liquor and wine space, pull those people into the mining industry and vice versa.
I think that's how we attract new talent.
Well, they'll have one major skill already down that you definitely need to get ahead in the mining industry.
I agree. It's a prerequisite.
Well, speaking of addressing new talent, we hear or talk about in the industry a lot that you're not seeing like a big group of, in particular, young people coming into the mining and geology space. What does that really mean? Like to you as a recruiter, what do you see that tells people there's a problem coming up?
This is an ongoing issue, I think, within our industry in particular, but I guess I could probably answer better with just our industry. We have the baby boomers, which are exiting the workforce in droves. And with COVID happening, we're forecasting potentially another 5% leaving because of the technological demands placed upon them during this time period that they just don't like or don't want to deal with. And so there's an array of issues that are causing sort of this mass exodus, I guess, of baby boomers. And then essentially after that, we don't have enough to supply the industry with the right kind of talent. And so we often call it we used to call it the 30-30 gap, which meant over 30 years of experience and under 30 years of age. And now I would really say over 40 years of experience and under 35 years of age. So the language is changing slightly, but I think going back to your point, we've had sort of so many cycles happen in mining that it drives people out. We do these mass cuts and when the commodity prices are low and off that person goes. And so, when things are good, we get fat and happy and everybody's got jobs and they're excited about it, similar to what we're sort of starting to experience again. And certainly during that time period between like 2004, 5 to 11, we saw that with a brief dip in 2008 to 9. But we have these cycles, and each time we lose folks to various industries that can provide more security or better benefits or locations or whatever. So the fact of people not entering is, I think, a separate issue, but the cyclical nature still doesn't help with that. People aren't entering because they don't know about it.
Yeah, I would assume that people who leave because of a downturn don't come back. Right? Because if they've moved over to a different industry that's more stable, they're not really looking to come back into that boom and bust cycle.
As we sort of started talking about the beginning of our conversation, I think that, engineering, geology, all of our skill sets, even mineral processing is so transferable into other outside areas. And now with us bringing in technology and automation, I think that even more so, the skills that we need in mining are used across the board in various industries. So often they do leave and don't come back. Often they're not welcomed back. And so I think as a recruiter, we see a bump in somebody's resume and say, why did you leave? Well, if you look at the dates, you know why they're gone.
Yeah, there was no work. Yeah.
There was no work, and so, you talk to folks and see what they do between, and a lot of these people start entrepreneurial ventures or they go to a different industry and apply their skill sets. I think the thing that we're really bad at in mining is re-welcoming those individuals back in and also thinking outside the box in terms of what might be acceptable even from within our industry. I mean, we often look at somebody with, coal for hard rock experience, and there's reasons for that, but these guys still have excellent, or gals have excellent educations and can learn. And so we're going to have to start being a little bit more open-minded. And so I think that's part of why we see people not coming back, because they just don't have the opportunity again, because we're elitists.
You stay in your box, stay in your copper or gold box and don't leave. Yeah. No, and I think that's coming from my career, which has been really non-traditional and working a lot now with the technology and innovation space. I'm constantly shocked at how little we recruit from outside the mining industry, right? Especially with all of the wonderful talk that I agree with, that the industry has to incorporate innovation, right? Diversity of thought and the ability to adapt and reach out to different stakeholder groups and become a different industry for the future. You would think we'd start pulling in people from other industries who have done really cool creative stuff and see what we can learn from them. But that doesn't seem to be happening, at least from where I sit.
I agree. I don't think it's happening enough. And I think we may have to start to see it. And I hope that we see more and more of it because it's so needed. And we have, a really great industry. And I think that the energy within it is unrivaled. I mean, I love working in mining and I haven't always. And so I think that you get the bug and you kind of stick with it. I think that diversity of thought, individuals within the industry needs to be more welcomed. And with this shortage, I think we'll have to start seeing it because there aren't any other options. We cannot fill this gap just with technology or automation or anything else that sort of we think might be the magic bullet. I mean, tossing money at it isn't going to solve the problem necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, and what do your clients say when you talk to them about that?
It really depends. This year in particular, I have a really broad array of clients, both in terms of commodity, size of company, stage of company, consultants, etc. And I think that with the rise of management being millennials or so, that they're being a bit more receptive to change. Even people that have been in the industry 30, 35, 40 years, I think that they're starting to come along to the idea that we have to do something different because there's just not the sources of talent that they expect, nor the caliber of talent that they expect. And so that knowledge transfer that's not happening within mining companies, because everybody is stretched so thin all the time, they can't or won't spend the time to train people up into the next role. These are all compounding issues, but without us looking outside the industry and being receptive to that, we're not going to get to where we need to be. So I've had a lot of clients that say, it's not ideal to have somebody without gold or copper or X background, but if you find somebody who has the aptitude to learn and who wants to do something different and who likes our location, our mission, our values, whatever, then we're open to talking to them because this is really more about fit and us building a team than it is about absolutely having the 10 bullet points out of the position description that we need to have. So I'm seeing more flexibility around roles right now, and that's really encouraging, not just for me as a recruiter, but I think for individuals who are seeking to diversify their background a little bit.
And what do you think companies can do or should be doing, or maybe doing more of, to attract people from outside to the industry, just to get people to even take a look at it?
I don't have a magic answer here, but, scarcity, I think, always makes something interesting. And also understanding where we get things and how things are made. And there's so many cool ideas and really interesting companies that have done work on this. And so I think Visual Capitalist is one, and I know that you've worked with them in the past, but they make great infographics. And they put a cell phone and say, there are X, Y, and Z minerals and things that we have to mine in order to make this. It's sort of like asking your kid, where does milk come from? And they don't know it's from a cow. We're looking at the same thing for all of the things that we love and keep in our back pocket all the time, or drive, or batteries, or whatever. And so having an awareness of the fact that we have to mine, I think, is part one. But this has to start from a very early age. And I like AMEBC up in Vancouver, they do mine tours and field trips for kids starting in elementary school and start educating them from a really early age. And mines aren't always proximate to elementary schools, probably hardly ever, in fact. But we have technology. We can do videos, we can do tours, we can do all kinds of stuff, but creating an awareness from a very early age that this is a career path, and companies that are major that have money to spend on it, just like ExxonMobil did in the 80s and 90s and put money towards STEM, this is an option and we'll support you through it. I mean, it was Super Bowl commercials back in the day. And so I think we just have a long way to go to catch up to other industries that have been really at the forefront of providing kinds of opportunities that kids didn't know about previously. And this is where I think mining has room to shine. And we have such great leaders and stories to tell, and you can travel the world and learn so many interesting things and really apply it to a variety of commodities or even industries if you don't feel like staying forever. So, I think part of it is really just figuring out how to get people enthusiastic and understand that mining is essential for moving forward in our environment at this point, and that it's not always a terrible thing.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned great leaders. I think one of the benefits of mining is we are in geology and the natural resource spaces, we tend to be very team focused, which is great,
Mm-hmm.
right? We really acknowledge it takes geologists and engineers and accountants and lawyers and financiers. Like there's the whole, as I like to call it, the Jabba the Hutt bar in Star Wars at PDAC every year, right? I mean, you've got like creatures from all over the universe of mining that come to one place. But so there's a huge range of things you can do in the mining space, but we don't often enough, I think, focus on inspirational leaders in the industry. If you think about electric vehicles, if you think about technology, if you think about even oil and gas, you've got like figures that people think about, people that kind of capture their imagination of what it's like to work in that space. And I think we don't talk enough as an industry about the really cool people that work in our industry to tell people about what it's like and all the crazy stories of running around all over the world and what happens when you do that and how creative and fun people have to do in order to get all that stuff done.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. And how do we sort of appoint an individual or multiples to be sort of the figurehead? And I know that that's not a lovely, flattering way of characterizing this individual, but that's what they need to be. We need a spokesperson, and we need somebody to say, like, mining is sexy and fun, and you should join. And these are all the wonderful things. And if you want to be an accountant or a lawyer or a geologist or whatever it is, you can do all these things. And so I would like to do that search.
You'd like to recruit the figurehead?
I'd like to recruit the figurehead. I've got some ideas. We have some really colorful, interesting people within mining, and I think a few people would be up to the job. But I think because we've recognized that mining is also part of renewables and that it's part of recycling and that it's part of this bigger idea in the world, that we probably have a bit more latitude and opportunity to start talking about it differently and using that as a platform to do so, and not just talk to one another, but really figure out ways. And I think you're doing a great job of this with Prospector in terms of making mining accessible to individuals aren't part of the industry. And I think the same thing goes in terms of trying to recruit into it. We have to make this accessible, and we have to make it something where people aren't shunned away because they aren't a technical person.
Yeah, and I think it's always important to acknowledge how high tech we are and how cool a lot of the stuff is that we do, but also remember that when it really comes down to it, we're breaking big rocks into small rocks, right?
And there's really cool equipment. They get to blow things up and have massive.
Exactly. We have everything from cool sensors that you get to fly to like you said, blowing stuff up to like cool software. But it doesn't have to be that complicated, right? For people to come in. I deal a lot with people who invest in the space and trying to convince a new person to put money into mining. They get overwhelmed by the jargon, right? And they think it's really super technical and that they don't understand everything that all of the geologists are saying and all the caveats and the 43101 reports and PEAs, right? And it's like, okay, there is all of this stuff, right? That's important and it's there for a reason. But just look at all the stuff that had to be done to build a Tesla car, right? That wouldn't stop you from investing in Tesla stock.
Well, and I think sometimes that we need to, rather than drilling into the weeds, particularly with individuals who are new to mining or mining investment, or, who are looking at mining as a potential educational background or future career, that we have to sell the vision, right? And so what is the end picture? This goes into a cell phone, or this goes into an electric vehicle, or whatever the case might be, or you're really passionate about, recycling. Turns out we have to figure out how to separate these materials from the other materials so that we can turn it into the next thing. So selling, I think, the vision and spinning that tail so that it appeals to somebody of X, Y, and Z background is sort of our challenge that we have to figure out how to get to, because without that, we'll never get them into it if we just start spitting off, geology maps and 43101s and all the rest of it, because their eyes will roll back in their head and it's like, we've lost them. So I think you have to make sort of the trailer, right? So it's like a movie. It's like all the good parts are absorbed into one little part, and then you're hooked. And so that's the same thing. Like, people are investing in Bitcoin and all these other alternatives at this point, but do they know what's going on? I can probably confidently say many of them don't, but for some reason they lost money at it because somebody was really great at talking about it and selling a vision.
Yeah.
And so we have to do the same thing.
Well, and I would imagine when you're recruiting, I did a tour of duty, as we called it, at IBM when I was with IBM with the recruiting department, and did university recruiting for our public sector group. Part of what they had us do is you always started by telling students stories, right? It was never like here are all the stats on the company and, here's the job. They never wanted you to start with that. They wanted you to tell the students the stories of things you had done and people you'd worked with, right? And I think that's the other thing is, and it's a weird gap, I think, in how people perceive mining, because we have phenomenal storytellers. Like, man, you go to a bar, have a few drinks, you're going to be there for a while, first of all, because everybody's got them and they're really entertaining and fun, right? Because it is a unique industry. And I think that's the thing I would, to attract people in, whether it's investors or young new hires or even just people from cross industries. Like, we got to start telling the story better of the experience and everything that we're contributing to the world.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's sort of, an early stage thing that we have to start figuring out. And like I said, for the most part, we've been really bad at it. And we've been really bad at welcoming outsiders into the industry and letting them figure it out so that they can help us tell the story. And they might be better at it than we are, because it's like somebody writing your biography and saying this person's really cool. It's the same thing for the industry, I think. And so let somebody else tell the story who's done it for someone else and been successful. Let's welcome that opportunity to what we do, because without it, I think we're going to continue to have the same problems.
Well, and on that note, of course, diversity and inclusion is a big deal in the mining industry, as it is globally and across industries right now. How do you see companies talking about that in their recruiting, and how do you see them, if they are, telling a different story, painting a different picture in order to attract a more diverse recruiting group so that they can have a more diverse employee base?
I think that that's an interesting question, because I think that inherently, because mines are all over the world, that we have a pretty diverse workforce. We've asked individuals to move around with us as teams because we identify that way. As you said, you have an exploration team, you pick up a guy in Ghana and you pick up one in Colombia, and all of a sudden you're, somewhere in Canada, and you're all working together. And so we do have some diversity, and I think more so than we give ourselves credit for. I think we generally are underrepresented in terms of women in the industry, but I think we've seen more women coming out of school in the last 5 years or so. And so maybe that's changing a little bit. I think also COVID has allowed us to work virtually. And so it's keeping more women in the workforce so that they can continue to take care of families if that's what they're choosing to do. And a lot of men are stepping out and taking that role on at this point. So I think we may balance that out over time, but truthfully, there are so few people available right now that I know clients are essentially going for the best qualified candidate, regardless of what their background or ethnicity or gender or any orientation might be. And I'm really encouraged by that. But I think at the top end, when we get to a board level, I mean, as we rise up, it does tend to be very male dominated and they tend to be a little bit white. So
A little bit.
yeah, adding more diversity into that. Canada has mandated this. At the beginning of the year, Canada said, we've got to, diversify, and it's not just mining, it's across the board in Canada. So they're mandating this, and that will cause work for us. What does that look like? Are there qualified candidates? It is yet to be seen. I'm sure there are. We don't have an exact picture of what that's going to look like. I think that it's an interesting role to take, but, I don't necessarily think it's going to take legislation to make this happen. I think that it's going to happen a little bit naturally. And I think we're seeing more women start companies, sit on boards, be powerful individuals within our mining space. You've been a part of Women in Mining for a long time. And so I think we have a really great platform and support system internally to make things like this happen. But we just have to keep women in the industry because they do tend, especially on the geology side, to sort of exit and not return because there is such a large field component and travel and otherwise. So figuring out ways to help that out. And I've always said that, being creative in how we provide benefits platforms would be a really excellent way of trying to retain that workforce, providing childcare, providing subsidies or whatever. I mean, if you want to do healthcare program, but you dedicate money to it and you put that away, tax free so that it helps pay for childcare, so that you can go out into the field or nanny or whatever, but let you choose it and let you figure out who and how you want to dictate this time and how it should be spent. All of that would help keep, I think, women and men now who, are also taking on the burden of taking care of families and households in the industry a little bit longer. And that way we keep people in. And so I think that just HR being creative in how they shape benefits and perks around individuals and what they need at this point can really influence the individuals and the diversity of our industry, I think.
Yeah, and I think at the board level, what I see happening or what I think might be going on is there's a really high preference when you're raising money for a exploration project or an early stage mine to have a board with considerable past experience in doing exactly what that company is going to be doing. Right. They want to be able to check off the block. It's a porphyry. It's got, it's of this size and it's got this mine life and it's in this country. And they want the people on the board and the senior management to basically check all of those blocks, which is really hard for people to break in, right? Either at the senior management level or the board level, if all of the money being raised is contingent on somebody having that exact experience. Especially with mining, because a lot of women in the geology space in particular, the natural progression would be to run an exploration company or be the CEO of a junior, but that requires a huge fundraising component. You then have to learn how to raise money. And it's really hard to do that, having sat in that seat, if you haven't done it before. So it's a bit of a chicken or the egg, right? You can't raise the money if you don't have the experience, and no one will give you the experience because they need to raise money. So it is tough. And I think it will require probably the bigger firms allowing or giving women an opportunity to step into those roles and show that they can do them, maybe without as much as experience as they would typically look for, and give them the opportunity to do it that way.
I think that we'll absolutely have to see that. I don't think just with women, I think generally as we move forward, I think that we've got this, as we said, sort of skills gap, and we're going to have a lot of people exiting and a lot of new people with great ideas trying to move something forward that haven't had this experience previously, but that are great at what they do. And so not having had experience raising money or dealing with private equity groups or funding bodies, I think it's going to become a little bit more normal. And so although we want this experience, I think that we may see individuals at the senior end lend themselves in as advisors or individuals on a board so that they can say, look, I'm here, I've reviewed this, I'm sort of the whiskers of this, and these guys aren't full of shit and they can do it. And I think that that's probably how it's going to go for a little while. But I'm really encouraged by the idea that there's so many individuals out there with great ideas that are different and that are, sort of have the audacity and the tenacity to go after something without having checked all of the boxes. That a lot of investors in mining have gotten quite savvy and have gotten burned in cycles without having done their homework. But I think it's getting harder and harder to pitch a bad mining program and a bad mine because there's that historical reference for it where there wasn't always before. And so I think that the investment side might be a little bit more secure in knowing that we've got the technology and the data behind it to continue this forward.
I also think the more we do bring in non-traditional mining investors, they're going to ask different questions. And they may look for different skill sets and different capabilities on management teams and on the boards. So if you do bring in, right now, I keep bringing up Tesla, but they are vertically integrating. And I know at least one of the companies, that they're going to be buying lithium from, and they've got a great board and a great management team that looks very different than the vast majority of mining companies. And it would not shock me if there were questions asked about, we're a tech firm, we're not a mining investing company, so we need to ask different questions than your usual investor or your usual customer. And we need to have folks on your team that we can talk to. So I would imagine that would also be a driving force in a little bit of change in the industry in the next few years.
I hope so. I'm very encouraged, I think, by seeing external investors coming into it and thinking that this is an interesting place to put their money. But also, it is important to have people who respond differently. And I always go back to sort of our company. And I've worked with my dad my entire career, but we couldn't be, it's black and white. We're very different in terms of how we would respond, and even to these questions. And so I think it's that diversity that makes a team and makes something credible and makes individuals like you want to invest in you. And so much of it is chemistry and not just that you have a good deposit or that you've got something promising moving forward. They're investing in the individual so often. And if you've just got sort of this, tweety little guy hanging out talking about maps the whole time, not get that investment.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up something interesting that you and I have in common. You work with your dad. I work with my husband. We're both still doing that after a long time. It must be unique. And to be running a recruiting company where I would imagine that you have really different opinions. Like, what's that like?
My dad started our company 40 plus years ago, and it's not always been mining focused. And so literally it was always run out of our house. And so we had an array of individuals working under our roof at any given moment, recruiting for, high tech or, HR professionals across industry or whatever the case may have been. And my dad always loved mining and he recruited HR folks into mining for a long time. And that's sort of how we spun into this industry. And I started on the HR side and I recruited a lot of HR people to a variety of industries, and they sort of always cursed me for doing so. I was like, this is miserable. I can't continue this. So my dad said, come do stuff on the mining side with me. And growing up, I'd travel with him and we'd go to mining conferences or whatever. And during the day, we would go to lunch with HR folks. And at night, we would go to dinner with mining folks. There was a very specific reason for that, because my dad loves to have a good time. And mining folks have great stories, have great times. And, we had really long dinners and I learned a ton and was introduced at a very early age to a lot of very interesting individuals who happened mostly to be exploration geologists. But working with my dad, has shaped sort of how I perceive the industry mostly, and the introductions that I've been provided, I think, at this juncture. Even though we have very different ideas of how to do our business, they kind of complete one another. So he thinks of it one way and I think of it another, but ultimately we come to the decision to do X. And so you need somebody to tell you you're wrong, or you're crazy, or why not think of it this way, and to challenge you a little bit. And I think often when you go into a group, or you go into it with friends or others, you keep hearing yes. And I always hear no. And he always hears no. So I think that challenging component, that competitiveness, that drive, sort of creates a better synergy to create a company where we can't be complacent with one another, with our roles in this industry. So that's a really long-winded answer of saying, like, I love mining, and I value sort of my mentoring into it, but it's hard to work with your family, but it's also rewarding, and we haven't killed each other yet.
Right? That's why I would say Mark and I are both still alive, and we're still married. So
right, and so that's a big deal too. So I mean, I think working with your husband might be a little different.
I don't know. I'm like, my dad, love him. He'll probably be listening to this. He was down here for a month, and hats off to you. Cheers to both of them.
I do think a 500-mile buffer, I call it. It's actually like 300, but I call it the dad buffer. And so I've lived in Arizona and Colorado, and he lives in Albuquerque. And so we always have this sort of radius. So we're never at the same place at the same time unless it's a mining conference.
Yeah, but it is neat. I mean, I think I know you've said that, like, you grew up pulling resumes off the fax machine, and I do love to see our daughter growing up. She's 5. You have to watch her because she likes to take things off the printer machine or off the printer, but she also loves to put things in the shredder. So sometimes they just go from one to the other. Yeah. But it's awesome when kids are also able to grow up around their parents and be in that environment. And I think about that too with mining, that we've taken Madeline all over the world. She went to, about a year and a half ago now, she went and saw her first drill rig down in Mexico and got to go into her first mine shaft and stuff, and she's 5. And you think about and I always do think with women in mining and the work that we do, bringing girls into those environments at a young age, so they do see how cool it is and fun it is. And she gets to go fly a drone with her dad to map the mine, all that kind of cool stuff. I think as the companies become more open to, or there are more women in the workspace, that may also pull in young people, because I think there's a tendency to want to have less of that work life, or have it a little more blurred. Maybe have your kids be exposed to more of it.
I can't agree more with that. I think that that's really an awesome, unique experience for your daughter. And, I wish I was 5 going into a mine, but I think I was probably like 25. But, it was an enlightening experience, and you don't forget it. I mean, I think that my very clever words after going underground the first time was like, it was really dark. But I didn't expect it to be as dark as it was.
She saw bats in the cave, and that's like her big takeaway. She's like, that time I saw the bats in the big cave. We're like, yeah.
I mean, it leaves a lasting impression. But I agree. And I have a really excellent client right now who's so sensitive and very attuned to creating a better work-life balance. And it wasn't just COVID. This has been sort of their mission for the last several years since they purchased the mine that they're at. They've done a really, really good job of putting their people first. What does that mean? I think creating values-based organizations that really live and to get that instilled in you from day one, and you buy into it even during the recruiting process. But I mean, it trickles through every person within the organization, and work-life balance is huge. Well, this is not something that I think millennials and certainly, the individuals coming in after us are going to negotiate about. I think that we want to be able to have a professional life and a personal life. And we've seen our families and individuals before us not be able to achieve that. And so being able to recruit into this industry, if we can be sensitive to that and actually build organizations that support that, it will help draw into the industry from a young age, like your daughter, but it'll also keep us in the industry, as you're saying. So I think that that's a really important point to mention. And I think that, I'm not going to tell you who my client is, but
what? Tell me. I want to go work there. No.
at some point it will come out. But
Yeah.
they've done a really great job, and they've been really open and receptive. And they're even looking at doing intern programs, which is not foreign, but they're saying, okay, instead of looking for the unicorn always, why don't we train these individuals or partner with the university so that we can get what we need?
Right.
And looking at that point and saying, I've been looking for a year. Why beat my head against the wall and not get what I want when I could have trained an individual in this amount of time out of a, whatever, college or tech program? And providing opportunities like that is huge. I mean, you're providing somebody with a livelihood at that point. And there is some loyalty and some, gratefulness in that, especially if you treat them right. So I think this idea of values-based corporations is really important for our industry. And we've talked about it, but I think we're moving into an era of millennials who want to travel and do good and make an impact, and they're moving up through these organizations. And I think we'll see more and more of that positive effect and trickle down. So sustainability stems from that also. And, that's something that has been a really popular buzzword for a long time in mining. But, when you put your money and your actions where that goes, that means that you're working with governments and mining companies to create something that really is long lasting and is doing the right thing. And that creates a more sustainable sort of workforce. Ideally, we have maybe less of a cycle, but that's probably wishful thinking.
Yeah.
So I think we're moving in the right direction, but we still have a lot of work to do.
How is it different recruiting millennials than baby boomers? Because you hear that a lot, that millennials want different stuff than other groups. And I'm at the very upper end of the millennial age spectrum, although I contest it because I played Oregon Trail in computer class, which I think should not make you a millennial. I think that's a big dip from that, the iPhone.
That was my favorite game.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it taught us about computers.
I don't know, but I'm still afraid of, crossing the river and dysentery and breaking my legs. So,
I know how to pack a wagon, right? To pack a lot of extra provisions, more than you would think you need, and extra wheels.
It's true. I think that this is a really important lesson, particularly for exploration geologists.
It is. I bet there's a really strong correlation between good exploration geologists and people who really kicked butt at Oregon Trail.
I don't know about recruiters. We just sit at our desk and talk to you guys all day, but we like to pretend we're adventurous.
There you go.
So I'll identify with that. But yes, I think millennials are a really interesting group generally. And I think the conversation is starting to transition out of how difficult millennials are and have been to what we're now facing with Gen Z.
Oh, yeah.
Calling them. Yeah. And so we have this whole group underneath us now that is even different than us and more risk adverse, actually. And so that blows my mind.
because they grew up during the 2008 financial crisis, right? So I have read that they really look for stability and, really risk averse.
They want online reviews. They want all kinds of things. They don't read. So recruiting even downstream, and that's not been an area that I get to focus on as much as a recruiter because we generally are asked to work that mid-level and up area. Yeah. But recently, that's not been the case. I'm getting asked routinely for entry-level and interns and individuals because they just don't know how to find them. And so my playing field is shifting and I'm having to learn this a little bit. And so I found myself listening to a lot of recruiting podcasts and a lot of HR podcasts and trying to figure out by reading and learning what the next generation is like. But to go back to what recruiting millennials is like, we're very values-based. And so, we grew up with baby boomer parents who may have divorced or separated or worked all of the time or whatever the case might be. And that's not the life that I think many of us have carved out for ourselves. We want more balance. And so we're forcing that change on organizations because we're becoming the leaders of those organizations. Right. And so I think COVID has been sort of the catalyst for rapid change
Mm.
in that, because everybody had to go home to work. And
Yeah.
so we had to do Teams meetings and we had to use Zoom, and this change is sort of being forced across the board. And so although we've been asking for remote work and flexibility in all of these areas for years, and haven't been given that because you have to be in the office, we're starting to see this happen. And it's only been a year, but like I said, it's sort of been a rapid sort of catalyst for this change. And I think it's really going to be interesting because I don't think that it's going to go away. And I've read and heard that most millennials or individuals moving forward, like 60% of those who could work remotely will continue to require that to be part of their role description if they accept their next role. So without that ability to work remote, if their kid is sick or they want to extend their vacation by a day, but kind of just stay holed up in the hotel while their kid goes to Disneyland or whatever the case might be, they're not going to consider the role seriously. And so I think that recruiting millennials, going back to the values-based corporation, we're dictating sort of what does this look like moving forward? Do they have good benefits? Do they value work-life balance? What kinds of 401k contributions are they making? Is there advancement opportunity? What location are they in, et cetera? So there's a lot of factors. And are they sensitive to, a dual income house? Often we've expected mining professionals to just drag their family to wherever they're going, or not leave them at home. We don't
Leave
care.
them and do fly in, fly out is of course a big thing too with mining, right? That for a lot of families wouldn't work.
And so being more sensitive to the fact that this might not just be a person, that they have a whole ripple effect outside of them, is a really important factor in terms of recruiting millennials, because they're not just going to uproot their spouse and say, let's go to the middle of nowhere and live there and have a crappy school for the kid. And you don't get to work anymore. And, this is a really big deal. So companies are getting pretty savvy on occasion with
hit or miss.
That. I tend to work with juniors and mid caps and a few selected majors, but we sort of have to have a meeting of the minds, because I think in our recruiting approach, we try to vet our clients and our candidates as much as we do, anybody. And so to represent a good job and a good candidate is really important. So how do you match and make everybody win? You all have to adhere to sort of a contract of behavior and values and all the rest of it. So, we don't always win, but we try to do a good job of figuring out the good ones versus the bad ones. And, there's something out there for everybody, so I'm not going to turn it away. But, we may find it's always about the needle in the haystack, I guess. And so millennials are just a different group and figuring out how to appeal to them. But now we're becoming the influencers. And I think that that's going to change things dramatically.
Well, I also wonder with Prospector, we have a really young team, because for a variety of reasons, but part of it is because those are the clients that we want to build the platform for. People coming out of school or in their first or second job that are thinking about starting to invest. We want it to be accessible and exciting and fun for those folks. You have to have your team reflect people that you want to be using your platform. And one thing that I've loved about COVID is it's allowed me to have a geographically diverse team, which I probably would have had a little bit of anyway, but there was literally no consideration about, well, this person is close to me or my COO or anything like that. It was like, let's just find the right people and they can really be anywhere. And it's also been really fun because you get to see a little bit more into people's lives when they're working remote and show them a little bit more of yours. The whole reason I became an entrepreneur was so that I could have a more integrated life. I always say I have terrible work-life balance because it's totally like all over the place, but it's really integrated. I work with my husband, our daughter travels with us, all that kind of fun stuff. And so I'm really open about my daughter popping in on conference calls and saying hi to everybody on the calls and knows who works with us, because that's what it would be like if she came to visit us at the office. And similarly, I see see more and more, even investors and people in really senior positions at companies doing similar things. We're like, hang on a second, my daughter's going to come in and pick something up, or I got to leave in a minute to take my son to soccer, which I never really saw that much of before COVID. There was so much more of a division between like work and personal life, where you kind of felt like, oh, okay, we're becoming friends outside of work, when people would finally talk about their spouse and their kids. And it's like COVID has just destroyed all sense of boundary.
Like,
But I think in a good way, in many sense, in a lot of senses. So
I agree, and I think I'm totally in concert with what you're saying. And I've worked from home for 15 years, so this isn't new for me, but sharing it is new. And so I've always tried to have division because there was none. My dad ran the company out of our house. And, like you said, I pulled resumes off the thing, and our mail is filled with resumes. And there was people, whether it was our bookkeeper or a recruiter or somebody, they were in our house all the time. This was my life. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I have my son like circling names in a directory for land managers or something. And he's like, does this count? And he's 9. So, like, what have I done? I've done the exact same thing. I didn't learn, and it's fine. And I think that it took me a while to really appreciate the lack of division and the ability to integrate my life into my work, because it's the same thing, right? So even though I am what I am at work, and I'm a mom and a wife, and the rest of the stuff that I choose to be on my personal time, ultimately they work together. And so my family is part of my work. I think it's been an interesting year because we're all getting there together and feeling this out. And so this is sort of uncharted territory and very rapid change, as we discussed previously. It makes for kind of a fun sandbox to play in, because nobody knows what's going to happen and how it's going to change. And, even big companies like Newmont, I talked to an individual and they're getting rid of, multiple opportunities. They're just saying, go work from home. We're not going to bring these back. We're going to get rid of 3 levels of our office here in Denver. We're going to cut from 6 floors to 3 and, create a space that if you want to come in and work, you can. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. They're not being flexible in terms of blurring that line. You have to choose whether you can work in office or at home. I'd love to see a hybrid version, because sometimes you need a place to go that's quiet and not have their kids screaming in the background or popping in on a conference call so you can focus. This is life. And I think it's really important that we figure out how to balance work and life and recognize that it's sort of one together. And so that blur that you're discussing, I think is the new norm. But I will also say that without commuting, employers are getting the best of us, because we generally feel guilty because we're not putting in the 8 to 5 or 6 or whatever we're used to. So we're working literally around the clock. So that time period that we're accustomed to having to respond to an email or a contract or whatever is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. It's a little taxing. And so I think we have to figure out ways to balance that better. And I don't have the answers. I read an article out of, I think, Spain recently that was saying, go cook dinner, cut it off. You cannot respond to emails until 9 or 10 o'clock. You can't just pop in and pop out. You have to have sort of some freedom of self and mind and thought at home. That's very European and I appreciate it. But, here in the US, I think that we have a little bit different perspective on it. And so when somebody sends you an email and asks you for something, you feel like you should have
you have to do it right then.
This is a deliverable and I have to do it. And so we're just geared to be competitive in that nature, I think. And so employers are getting a lot out of us. So I think a statistic was saying that we're saving 25 hours on commuting back and forth to jobs. However, employers are getting roughly 25 hours more of work from us, and we don't even realize it.
And that's
balance.
where I know I had a mentor who told me as I was stepping into my first like real big management role, they said, one tip I would give you is if you're working late at night, use your draft box. If you're working fine, and if because for me that especially was something I would stay up late because it was quiet time, right? And that's when I would write and think through things. But I learned, or I really tried to like write those emails and then save it. And send them out first thing in the morning, because I had a boss early in my career who would call me at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and expect me to answer. And that really did gear me to like, you are on call 24 hours a day. And while I loved that boss and I learned a lot from him, like, I don't think that's the healthiest thing. And I think, junior employees or folks just coming into the career at their very beginning stages will think, if my boss emails me at 9 o'clock at night, I need to stay up and get this done. Right. And that's not necessarily what we mean. We just want it off of our to-do list. Right. We want it out of our.
I don't have to think about this anymore. Exactly. It's been nagging me all day long, and I just need to get this to go away.
Cross it off. Right. But it creates this, this impulse from the rest of the team that they then have to stay up till 11 to get you the answer back. And then it's back in your inbox, and then you're up till 1 then to get out again.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Right. No. But I do think that the blurring, one thing I would say, since we're both involved with women in mining, is I do think that, I think there used to be a perception that hiring working moms in particular, like the kids were always going to interfere and they always had to do this or that and would have to go pick up kids from school or stay home when kids were sick. And I think that this has kind of blown apart that box that just speaking for myself, working moms would sometimes be put in, right? And it's now like, wow, no, everybody's had to kind of dig in and do this. And everybody has to have screaming kids in the background every once in a while, or barking dogs or whatever it might be. And so I really hope that that's a lasting impact from COVID, is we all just kind of acknowledge that, like you said, that's life. And it shouldn't stop you from hiring someone just because they're in the stage of their life where they've got family obligations in addition to professional.
No, and I couldn't echo that sentiment more. And I think it's been an empowering and really important lesson for all of us in the last year, because I think, it's staring us in the face. There was so much time where we had to figure this out. We had to figure out technology. We had to figure out how to work from home. We had to figure out how to take care of our kids and do everything all at once. And it wasn't just a mom problem. It was an everyone problem. And, if I move my camera, and I know that you can't hear this on the podcast, but that's my husband's desk back there. And so we share an office, and he's a professor. And so he's teaching classes. I'm trying to have interviews. I'm standing outside in a snowstorm trying to talk to somebody in Mongolia or wherever they are. And he's teaching a class. This is life. And we have to figure out ways of incorporating it, embracing it, supporting one another. And I think that that's really been left out of our conversation generally in recruiting, in mining, and to move forward together. I think that we really have to understand that we're people and that we have families, and that this is all important, and that you're not unique because you've got a barking dog or a screaming kid or whatever, and neither am I. But we're trying to do the best that we can and be professionals, and it doesn't hinder our work because that's somewhere in the background. At some point you'll find time to dedicate all of your attention to whatever their pressing need is and find the answer for them. So this has been a good year for that. I'm really encouraged by seeing the acceptance of it across the board. I used to apologize because people didn't understand that I didn't work, that I worked from home. And I'd say, oh my gosh, my dog is barking, and now it's the kid is crying, or whatever the case might be. But now nobody asks a question about it. And that's just a really nice level playing field for all of us. And to have the option potentially to go in or have a rental workspace for meetings or whatever you have to do, or go into the office as needed, or even just to have a remote team and hop onto a meeting. It's a very nice thing in our industry and across the board for us.
Well, to close out, you are a recruiter. So of course, what are your tips I'm sure you've got like a top three. What are your tips for folks that are thinking of getting into the mining industry or are looking to change jobs right now? Like, what would you tell people in terms of getting ready for that?
Entering the mining industry is slightly different than switching jobs. So entering the mining industry, I would say, don't say no. Just, there is no straight line to where you want to be. And I always use a geology sort of, example for this. How many straight lines do you see on the map? Most of them are wiggly. You're going to take this sort of circuitous path to wherever you're going to get. But at an entry level, find a good mentor, find somebody to help you make decisions, provide introductions. I don't care if it's a recruiter or a friend or a boss or whatever they might be, but they know more than you do. Use them as a sounding board so that you can navigate what to do moving forward. And you have to develop this relationship because to do it on your own is very, very hard. And you don't have all the answers. So having a more global perspective is invaluable. I think with others looking to change careers in terms of tips, you really need to do a self-inventory and understand what is it that you want next. A lot of people will say, I don't like my boss, I don't like this location, my wife or my husband isn't happy here. And then they switch, but they're in the same spot, just with a different job. And so 3 or 5 years later, you're in the same position. So I think that you need to think with the end in mind and shape sort of what you do between now and then so that you can accomplish what you want. And that's a hard thing to do, and it requires some planning, and you don't always have the option, I guess. And so I want to be sensitive to that in my answer also. I think that, if you have lost your job and you have to find another one or the market is down, you're in a much different position. But if you're in a good situation and you have the opportunity to evaluate and make decisions at that point, then you should take all these other factors into consideration. If you're pressed to find something else or the market is, oversupplied in terms of candidates and less on opportunities, then you've got a very different battle to face. So I'm going to answer this in the best case scenario where you have options. You have to sort of do a self-inventory and again, rely upon networks and connections because this is a personal business and one that everybody is connected in. So I think you have to make sure that you do a good job always and rely upon your network.
Yeah, I think that's something that would surprise a lot of people, how connected the mining industry is, right? And how important reputation is, which I think is something I always talk about a lot with new folks coming in or new people coming in, is this is not cutthroat in the same sense that, especially if people are coming in from finance or maybe consulting, the people have long-term relationships in the mining space and maybe will have worked with the same people, multiple times and really ask around about, hey, what do you know about this person and how did they do on this project and how did they work in a team? Because in many cases, you're out in the middle of nowhere, like literally camping with your colleagues. So people don't want to be working with someone who's a jerk, right? Like, because you have to put up with them under really extreme circumstances.
Yes. And
don't be a jerk. Yeah.
Don't be a jerk. I mean, I tell you how often the requirement when I say what's got you looking for a new job or whatever the case might be, whether it's somebody looking for a person or, company looking for a person or a person looking for a job, what's got you looking? I always ask, I should learn better than this, but I haven't. And they always say, I just want to like them.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, so this just got much harder. Instead of telling me the top 5 things that you want to see in their resume, you want to like them.
Right. Let me put my shrink hat on now. Let me become your therapist. Okay, let's go through this.
And my dad always said that this is equal parts recruiting as social work, and it's totally true. And so it's really interesting, but it is very relationship derived, and so you don't have room to mess up, and also you don't have room to not take time to network, and so you are in just as dangerous of a spot by not maintaining your network as you are by doing something bad, because if
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows who you are, you're also not going to get the job. We can't check you out, and there's no sort of historical reference, and you've just fallen off the map and worked in weird places forever, and there's no sort of dots linking you to something. It's really hard. And I talked to lots of those folks who have just taken expat roles after expat roles, and they've had a great time and they've done wonderful things, but they have no valuable network to rely upon when they need to do the next thing, or when they want to go back to home, wherever home looks like for them. So you have to do that. It's very important.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, because whether it's to continue progressing where you are or to be able to shift and try something new, for me at least, it's always been my network that supported me in whichever direction I wanted to go. And even for people just starting out, you never know where those folks are. That John Godbout, who's my COO at Prospector, he and I worked together at IBM as new grads out of college, right? And, so you never know when those folks are going to come back and be really important and great people to work with again. And I do think, again, that one of the real benefits of our industry is we do have a lot of really fun, nice people that are attracted to it. And hopefully we can bring more in from outside.
That's my hope. I think, you're doing a really great job. I looked over all of your stuff and I was really impressed. I mean, I think generally making, a platform that's palatable for outsiders to try to invest in mining is huge. And I haven't seen it done the way that you're doing it. Even the news feed, is just so easy to absorb. And I really appreciate that, because not everybody has the time or the capacity to sort of deal with all of the minutia of the technical. So I think you're doing a fabulous job, and I think more people like you in our industry, can become sort of the spokespeople moving forward. And so I'm optimistic that we'll overcome sort of this dearth of talent, and that sounds terrible, but it is a dearth of talent. And so knowledge transfer and great people, are really important, and we have lots of them. So I think it's encouraging.
Well, and cheers to you, because oftentimes the first person people talk to about the industry is the recruiter that they're chatting with. So I think you're a great representative for the industry and communicate about it so well and why it's a great place to work. So cheers to that and getting new folks in, and look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you for your time, Emily. I really appreciate it. It was fun to chat.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you to our guest and my colleague, Lindsey Schultz, for joining us on this episode of On the Rocks. To learn more about Lindsey and MRC recruiting, visit miningsearch.com and check them out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. For more about Prospector, go to prospectorportal.com or check us out on Instagram at ProspectorAI and LinkedIn at ProspectorPortal. Thanks for joining us on the Rocks. Until next time, keep your glasses full and your ice cold. Cheers.